Hey there, welcome back to Utility Sports. And as we advance in the playoffs, these videos will continue to come out with my playoff predictions. This video specifically focuses on round two of the NBA playoffs. I feel like we had a really fun, competitive round one, even despite no 7-game series. I still think there was a lot of good things to take away from the first round of the playoffs. And it's really, helping me make these selections as we go into round two. If you guys are new to the channel, please leave a like and also subscribe to the channel. And here were my picks from round one. And as you can see, I picked the Nets in 6. They won in 6, even though they got off to a 3-0 start. Few bad games in a row there. Obviously, Joel Embiid's injury played into that, and they ended up winning in 6 against the Toronto Raptors. I picked the Celtics in 5 over the Brooklyn Nets. That was the pick I got the most flack for, and I actually overestimated the Brooklyn Nets, and the Celtics finished off the series sweep in 4 games. Then the Bucks, I picked them in 5, and they won in 5 over Chicago. I picked the Heat to sweep the 8th seed. So quick note about this, I did do the pick'em and playoff predictions before the play-in. So, I had the Heat beating whoever the 8th seed was, whether that was Cleveland or Atlanta or Charlotte, in a sweep. Of course, they ended up beating Atlanta in 5 games. I picked the Mavericks in 5. I picked the Mavericks in 6, excuse me. They won in 6. I caught a lot of flack for that one too, with people saying, oh, Luka's injury. I knew what Brunson was capable of. I knew how good Dorian Finney-Smith and Reggie Bullock were defensively, and I thought that they had everything you needed to do to beat the Utah Jazz. I picked the Suns with a sweep over the Pelicans, which at that time was actually an 8th seed. I actually did predict the Pelicans to get the 8th seed, and I thought they would sweep them. They ended up winning in 6. That was a much more competitive series than I thought. I do think D-Book's injury did play into that a little bit as well. So, otherwise, I think fully healthy team Suns maybe do sweep that series. I picked the Grizzlies in 5 over the Timberwolves. Now, here's a little asterisk. I actually picked the Timberwolves to lose in the play-in. So I thought they were going to be playing the Clippers. That was my prediction in that video. But then I had comments asking me what I thought about that series with the actual Wolves in it. And I thought that the Grizzlies would win in 5 in that case, because I did have the Clippers beating the Grizzlies, and I still stand by that. I think they still would have, just looking at how Jaren played in the first round. And I think the Clippers would have really mitigated some of the Grizzlies' success getting to the rim with those wing defenders that they have. But nonetheless, I did pick Grizzlies in 5 over the Timberwolves. They ended up winning in 6 in Minnesota. And then I picked Warriors in 6 over the Denver Nuggets, partially because I wasn't sure of Steph Curry's status going into that series. Of course, he looked really, really good toward the back half of that series. So they won in 5 games, and I think they're a team that is really, really rolling. So it's actually funny here because I did get all of the series right. I picked each winner correctly, specifically after the play-in tournament was over. And that's the fun part about the play-in, is it's only 1 game, so it's really hard to pick who's going to win, which is why it's must-watch TV. It's like a game 7. So really, really interesting. This is how my round 1 predictions played out. I feel fairly accurate. And then now as we move into the round 2 matchups here, let's start with the 76ers and the Heat. I do think this is an interesting matchup. The Heat, they have not been healthy all season, and yet they keep on winning games. And Bam Adebayo is probably the best player you could dream up to guard the 76ers team, because he's so switchable out in space, but he's also very, very elite in drop coverage. And I think he's going to be able to be one of the few players in the world that could actually give Joel Embiid a little bit of struggles, specifically with Joel Embiid dealing with an injury. And I really do think it was important that the Raptors pushed the Sixers to 6 games. Had they, swept them and given James Harden and Joel Embiid some time to rest, I think that would have been vital for the 76ers team. And the 76ers, when they first acquired Harden, I thought this team could maybe get to the Eastern Conference Finals. But now just the matchups that they drew, I feel really, really not great about it. Toronto, I thought, was already a hard series for them just because of the defensive length. They got a little lucky with some of the injuries that they didn't have to face, Fred VanVleet for parts of that series and Scotty Barnes as well. But I still think it was a gruesome series for them, because there's a lot of physicality. There's a lot of going on against the Toronto Raptors. And then you get to follow that up with the Miami Heat, who are probably the most physical team in basketball. Very good defensively, 1 through 5. The only real weaknesses on their defense is going to be Tyler Hero and also Duncan Robinson. And then the nice thing is, when they stagger those 2 guys' minutes, you attack one of them, you're going to have Bam Adebayo as a help guy. Jimmy Butler's going to come rotate over. They've got a lot of length, and all of a sudden you're driving down the lane and Kyle Lowry takes a huge charge. This Heat team is really well set up. PJ Tucker is going to fight through screens and make life difficult for James Harden. Those two are former teammates, so he knows a lot of his tricks. And I think realistically here, I really like what Philadelphia put together with Harden and Embiid. I think those two guys are a really good fit together, but I just can't see them beating the Heat in a 7-game series, even though I think the Heat will struggle at points. I think one thing we don't talk enough about is how good Joel Embiid is defensively himself. And I think the Heat, who kind of have a so-so offense, if we're being honest about it, even with Atlanta, who had a lot of injuries, specifically going into that series, John Collins was banged up toward the end of the year. Atlanta did not play well at all. Trae Young played terribly. And I don't think the Heat absolutely destroyed them. Now, I think the Heat really controlled that series. And I never was questioning whether the Heat would win that series or not, but it wasn't massive. And I think the thing here with Philadelphia is I think Harden's going to play way better than Trae Young did. And I think Joel Embiid's going to play way better than Trae Young did. So I think this series is way more competitive than that last one, but I ultimately think the Heat win in 6 games against Philly here in this series. Then we go on to the Suns versus Mavericks. We're going out to the West, to the number 1 seed out there, which is the Phoenix Suns. And I know the Dallas Mavericks caught a lot of flack for playing Luka Doncic that final regular season game against the San Antonio Spurs, specifically because he did suffer that calf strain that kept him out the first few games of the series against the Utah Jazz. Luckily, the Mavericks were able to get through it. And this is why they wanted to play that game, because had they won and the Warriors lost, the Mavericks would have advanced up to the 3 seed, and they would not have had to play the Phoenix Suns at this point. Instead, in round 2, they would have drawn the Memphis Grizzlies, which I think is a serious gap between these two teams. I think the Phoenix Suns are the worst matchup in the entire playoffs for the Dallas Mavericks. I really, really do believe that. I'm a Dallas Mavericks fan, so Mavs fans, hear me out on this one. I want the Mavericks to win, don't get me wrong, but I just don't really think that's possible. Mikal Bridges, and anyone who's watched the Mavs for an extended period of time knows that Mikal Bridges is the best player in the league to put on Luka Doncic. He makes him work harder than any other player I've ever seen, including Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. I think Mikal Bridges defends Luka better than those two players did. Although an engaged Kawhi probably, is at the very peak. Kawhi offensively has more stuff to do, so he's not on him as consistently. Mikal Bridges will be on him the entire series. And then Jay Crowder's going to come in, muck some things up as well, probably step on his ankle once or twice, bump into him here and there. This is just the things Jay Crowder does. And then the other thing is, anyone who's been a long-term Mavs fan knows Chris Paul just dominates Dallas. He really, really does. CP3 loves facing the Mavericks. He has his entire career. I believe he has a 61% win percentage against Dallas throughout his career. And remember, that means he was playing up against Dirk for a vast majority of that, and now against the Luka Doncic Mavericks as well. CP3's just found a lot of success. Now, the one thing that the Mavericks are going to be banking on here, and the one chance that they have in this series, is, first of all, Reggie Bullock has to play great perimeter defense against Chris Paul. Dorian Finney-Smith has to be very engaged against Devin Booker, and we have to hope Devin Booker doesn't play at 100% and he's maybe not himself. And then Dwight Powell needs to have the best playoffs of his career, or Maxi Kleber. One of those two guys needs to step up big time, because it's going to be very switch heavy. You're going to have to help a lot on Chris Paul as he gets to the mid-range, and the defensive rotations are going to have to be perfect in order to deal with Phoenix. Otherwise, we're going to see JaVale McGee, Bismack Biyombo, DeAndre Ayton catching lobs at the rim, and we're going to see the Suns team making the Mavericks look silly. I think realistically, the Suns could win in as early as 5, but I think I'm going to pick them in 7 here, because Luka does elevate his play in the postseason, and Jalen Brunson's starting to figure himself out as well for the playoffs. The Mavericks are rolling. The Mavericks are a really good team, and people laughed at me when I said they were going to be a second-round exit. I had them as the 6th best team in the league, and losing to Phoenix, if they lose to Phoenix in 7 games like I'm predicting, I think that's vindicated to say they were a top 6 team in the league this year. When everything's clicking, Dallas is really, really awesome, and I think Dinwiddie's going to have to play really well off the bench this series as well. The thing here for me, for Dallas, is you have to play really, really well to match up with Phoenix, where I think Phoenix has a little bit more wiggle room to get through this series, just because I know Chris Paul is going to play so well, and I think they have an advantage on the inside as well with DeAndre Ayton. So for me, I'm picking the Suns in 7. I think this is going to be a really fun series to watch, though. Then we move on to Warriors versus Grizzlies, and this is an intriguing series here as well. And I know, based off of recency, I think a lot of people are going to choose the Warriors here, but hear me out on why this is going to be a series. Obviously, the Warriors cruise through the Denver Nuggets. Now, we know that's not the same Nuggets team as normal. No Michael Porter Jr., no Jamal Murray. Definitely does change things. And Golden State, they were battling through some injuries as well. Jordan Poole has descended into a star. Klay Thompson's getting back to that level as well. Draymond Green, probably one of the smartest defensive players of all time. And Steph Curry, the greatest gravity shooter to ever play the game. He pulls the defense so far out and draws so much attention that it makes the game so much easier for everyone else. I love their little fast five lineup with Poole, Wiggins, Draymond, Curry, and Klay. I just think that's really, really awesome. The Poole party bunch, really, really talented. But there's one thing about Memphis here. Memphis kind of owns the Golden State Warriors. Multiple 20-plus point wins against the Warriors in recent memory. Then we look back to last year's play-in as well. Now, I know this is not the same Warriors team, and it's not even the same Grizzlies team, but in recent memory, the Grizzlies have really taken the Warriors' lunch money. Now, this is a playoff series, not a play-in game, and this is not regular season series. This is a playoff series, so it is vastly different. I'm going to pick the Warriors in 6, but I think this series is going to be more competitive than people are probably talking about right now, because yes, the Warriors are kind of on a high note, and the Grizzlies are looking at themselves like, ooh, what's going on here after a tough series with the Wolves. But I think the Wolves were probably the toughest matchup for the Grizzlies that they could have drawn in round 1, other than the Clippers. I think the Clippers would have been a tougher matchup, but I think ultimately the Wolves were a very tough matchup as well for Memphis, just given Towns, his perimeter skill set, played Steven Adams off the floor. The one thing about this as well is I think Taylor Jenkins is a really good coach, and I think he's going to make a lot of adjustments that keep the Grizzlies in this series. But ultimately, if Jordan Poole keeps playing the way that he's been and Steph Curry stays healthy, knock on wood there, I think the Warriors are just too talented here for Memphis. And this isn't an upset season here for Memphis. You should be really happy about making the second round of the playoffs with such a young core. And there's a lot of things to build off of from this season. So Memphis fans, don't feel too disappointed if the Warriors do win in 6 games. Again, another really good series here. I think the whole second round here is going to be a lot of really good series. And then here we are into the final matchup. So these are the top 8 teams, remember, and we're looking at Celtics versus Bucks here now. And Milwaukee, of course, the 3 seed, has to go into Boston for the first 2. And injuries have really been substantial in this postseason. And specifically for Milwaukee, when we try and consider this series, I think injuries on both sides are going to be very prevalent. You look at Chris Middleton, of course, dealing with that knee injury. That is going to be very derailing for the Milwaukee Bucks, because Celtics fans, you know how well Chris Middleton loves to play against you guys in the postseason. Seems not too long ago that he was averaging 37 points a game in a playoff series against Boston a few years back. And now we look at Milwaukee, and if they have to play without him, it does become really tough. They lose one of their best perimeter creators. And I think that's really essential against Boston. We saw how much Kevin Durant struggled in that series against the Boston Celtics. Losing one creator and playmaker is vitally damaging to a team when you're facing the Boston Celtics. Their defense is so well oiled. They are very, very smart, in tune. Everyone understands the system they're running, and Ime Udoka deserves a ton of credit for that. But then on the Celtics side, you don't have Robert Williams. Well, you do, but you're not at 100% with him. He's a player. I probably would have voted for him for Defensive Player of the Year. I think that Robert Williams was extremely impactful for that defense, and we all know who you have to stop in Milwaukee. It's number 34. If you can't stop Giannis, you're going to have issues. And I think Robert Williams is going to be their best rim protector to rotate over. I don't think they would have put him on Giannis. I think they would have put Horford on Giannis and then tried to use Robert Williams as an athleticism big behind in order to try and alter some shots at the rim and just make life more difficult for Giannis. Ultimately, you're never going to stop him, but you have to make him work, slow him down, and make him use a lot of effort to score the basketball throughout an extended series. The reason I saved this one for last, this is the hardest one to pick. I'm going to pick Celtics in 7, but it's really, really hard because you have the reigning champion Milwaukee Bucks and the Boston Celtics, who just swept the Brooklyn Nets in 4, and looks like they didn't even break a sweat really in that series. They executed toward the back end of every single game and really just took care of business. And I think Boston, they're going to ride that high. They're also a little bit more fresh than the Boston Celtics because they've had more days of rest. Maybe there's going to be a little bit of rust there. So I really don't want to pick against Milwaukee, but just based on what I've seen from Boston in the last 3 months of the NBA season, it's really hard to not pick them in every single series. I think the Bucks are the team that I thought probably would have won the finals or at least made it there from the East. But now, having seen Boston through the first 4 games of the playoffs, it really validated everything I saw. toward the back half of the season. So now I'm going to ride with Boston in 7 games. Again, this is going to be the best series. I think this and the Suns versus Mavericks are going to be the 2 best series this round. And I think we get into the conference finals with some really, really great basketball teams. I think the top 8 teams are all really talented. If I did pick against your team, it's nothing personal, right? I'm just going through, I have to pick a winner, which means I have to pick a loser. And unfortunately, this is the way it shook out in these ones. But the nice thing is a lot of these teams are really well set up for future success as well. Hopefully you guys did enjoy today's video. If you did, leave a like, also subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see if I can get my my second round predictions as well as I did my first round ones, but I'm a little bit more hesitant about this because the deeper you get in the playoffs, anything can happen. Crazy turn of events here and there. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Give me your pick'em and predictions as well. Thanks again so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.